It was my 70th birthday, a day that should have been filled with laughter and warmth. Yet the air felt heavy the moment I entered the dining room. The table was long decorated with lilies, my late wife's favorite, and on it sat the cake my granddaughter had carefully baked. But as I looked across the table, my eyes stopped at the empty chair right beside me. That seat was always reserved for my daughter. For years she used to sit there holding my hand when I blew out the candles. Today, she chose the far end of the table, her back almost turned toward me. The sight of that vacant chair felt louder than any insult. On the seat lay nothing but a folded napkin, untouched as though it had been deliberately left bare. It reminded me of an ordinary object that had suddenly grown strange, like a door that should have been closed, left ajar, just enough to unsettle the mind. I tried to ignore it, but every time I glanced that way, it was like the chair whispered of betrayal. I reached into my jacket pocket and touched an envelope I'd been carrying all day. The handwriting on it was one I knew too well, my late wife's elegant, slightly slanted script. She had written my name on it years ago before she passed. Her familiar trace clung to me even now, a quiet anchor in the storm of estrangement. I hadn't opened it yet, but tonight as I stared at that empty chair, I felt its weight more than ever. 3 years had passed since my daughter truly looked me in the eyes. We spoke only in fragments, often cold-clipped words. I'd raised her for decades, yet in this moment we might as well have been strangers across a crowded room. The gap between us was no longer just emotional. It was etched into the empty space at my side. A cousin tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but my daughter's voice cut through the laughter. "He doesn't deserve the seat," she said, not loudly, but loud enough for me to hear. The words struck harder than any illness I've ever known. Betrayal, after all, is felt most deeply when it comes from one's own blood. And yet, even as my heart tightened, I reminded myself of the envelope of my wife's last secret. I knew that what it contained might change everything. The risk of collapse, of losing not just dignity but family itself, loomed large. Danger wasn't always a gun or a knife. Sometimes it was the slow unraveling of love thread by thread until nothing remained. I sat up straighter, steadied my breath, and whispered to myself, "This is not the end. This is only the beginning." And that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The clinking of silverware should have been a comforting sound, but tonight it only deepened the silence that hung around me. Every cousin, every grandchild, every distant relative seemed to sense the tension, though no one dared to name it. My daughter, sitting so far away, laughed lightly at something her husband whispered, yet her eyes never once met mine. The absence of her gaze was louder than any accusation. I tried to cut the cake, my hands trembling slightly, and when I offered the first slice, my granddaughter ran forward to take it. She smiled at me with her mother's eyes, my late wife's eyes, and for a moment I felt warmth. But when I turned to offer the second slice to my daughter, she looked down, busying herself with her phone. She acted as if I were invisible. My hand froze in the air, holding the plate until my nephew awkwardly reached across and took it, saving me from further humiliation. Around the table, the silence thickened. People coughed, shuffled in their seats, murmured about the weather. No one wanted to acknowledge the chasm between father and daughter. Yet in that silence, the truth screamed louder than any outburst. Families often claim blood is thicker than water, but sometimes the silence of betrayal is heavier than stone. I lifted my glass, trying to force a smile. "To family," I said, my voice wavering only slightly. Some clinked their glasses politely. My daughter didn't raise hers. She simply sipped her wine, her eyes still downcast. That small refusal cut deeper than a shouted insult. An old proverb drifted through my mind. Silence has its own way of speaking. I thought of the countless times my wife and I had sat at this very table. Her hand squeezing mine when our daughter sulked as a teenager, whispering, "She'll come around, just give her time." But decades later, time seemed to have only sharpened the distance. When the laughter eventually returned, it was forced, brittle like glass about to shatter. My son-in-law made a joke about me being old-fashioned, and a few relatives chuckled too loudly. I smiled faintly, though my chest tightened. There is a loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who pretend not to notice your pain. Later that night, as the candles melted low, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. The scent of lilies followed me, my wife's favorite flowers, and it was then I felt again for the envelope in my pocket. Its edges were frayed, but its weight was solid, undeniable. I thought of the folktale my grandmother once told me of a tree that grew in silence for years, storing strength in its roots until the day it finally split a stone in half. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the most powerful weapon. I leaned against the wall, listening to the muffled sounds of my family still eating, laughing, pretending. I wondered if they saw me as frail, irrelevant, forgotten. My daughter's refusal to sit beside me to acknowledge me seemed like the final proof. Yet deep inside, I knew something they did not. My wife's envelope still whispered of secrets they hadn't yet imagined. For now, I let the silence win. I turned my back to the dining room, inhaled deeply, and prepared myself. The storm had only begun. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. Back in my bedroom, the house finally quiet after the last relative had left, I sat on the edge of my bed with the envelope in my hands. It was small, yellowed with age, and sealed with a neat line of glue that had darkened over the years. I traced the familiar handwriting across the front, my name written in my wife's graceful script. That trace of her felt alive, as though she had only written it yesterday. My hands shook not from weakness, but from the gravity of what I was about to uncover. I remembered when I first saw her practicing that handwriting years ago, sitting at the kitchen table with her fountain pen. She insisted on writing letters, even when phones were easier. A voice can lie, but handwriting always betrays the truth, she once told me. That memory pressed against my heart like a ghost. Tonight, I was about to let her voice rise from the paper again. I hesitated. Opening this envelope meant stirring things that had been buried since her passing. It meant facing truths I wasn't sure I wanted my daughter or anyone to know. But the weight of humiliation at dinner of that empty chair beside me pushed me forward. I carefully slid a knife under the flap, breaking the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet, and along with it, a small brass key no larger than a thumb. The key surprised me more than the letter itself. I held it up to the lamplight, its teeth worn the metal dull. It seemed ordinary, the kind of key that could belong to a desk drawer or an old trunk. Yet it carried a heaviness as though it had been waiting years to be turned. The letter began simply, "My dearest, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I could not speak these words in life, for they would have caused storms I was not ready to weather. But you must know the truth. One day our daughter will turn away from you. When she does, you must not despair. You must remember what we have hidden and why." I stopped breathing for a moment. The words felt prophetic. My wife had written this letter long before my daughter had grown so distant, yet she had foreseen it with painful clarity. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, her favorite scent, as though time had failed to erase her presence. I pressed the page to my face for a moment, closing my eyes. Then I continued reading. "This key opens more than a lock. It opens protection. Do not reveal it until the moment arrives when her cruelty outweighs her love. Then let the truth speak for itself." I stared at the key again, trying to remember if I had ever seen the lock it belonged to. The words were vague but deliberate, as if my wife had known the day would come when silence and humiliation would press me to the edge. I placed the letter back into the envelope, the key resting in my palm. Its weight seemed disproportionate to its size, like holding an entire choice in my hand. To use it could change everything. To ignore it could mean watching my daughter's disdain grow unchecked. Outside my window, the night deepened, quiet but thick with possibilities. Somewhere in this house, or perhaps beyond, was the lock this key would open. Silence has its own way of speaking. Tonight, it told me the storm had only begun, and I was holding its first spark in my hand. The night stretched long, yet I could not bring myself to sleep. I placed the letter on my bedside table, but my eyes kept returning to the slanted lines of her handwriting. Each stroke carried her presence, elegant, firm, deliberate, the kind of writing only someone patient and thoughtful could produce. I had watched her form those letters countless times, as if her soul had flowed through the pen. I remembered the first letter she ever wrote me back when we were young and poor. She had sent it to the construction site where I worked, folded neatly into my lunchbox. "Don't work yourself to death," she had scrawled, her words playful yet tender. That note had stayed in my wallet for years, worn and torn until it was replaced by bills and receipts. But I never forgot the way her letters curved, the way she always left a little extra space between words, as if breathing life into them. Now, staring at the handwriting on this final letter, I felt her voice whispering across the years. She had known something I didn't, that our daughter would turn cold, that the bond we had poured decades into might crack like old porcelain. The thought chilled me. Did she see this coming, even as she smiled at family dinners? Did she keep this secret locked inside, waiting for me to discover it only after she was gone? The brass key glinted on the table. I picked it up again, turning it between my fingers. Its groove seemed to mock me, as though daring me to find the lock it belonged to. A key without a lock is nothing but a riddle. and riddles I realized were my wife's way of protecting what mattered most. Downstairs, the old grandfather clock struck midnight, the chimes echoing through the silence. I thought of another time years ago, when my daughter, barely 12, had scribbled her homework in a rush. Her letters were jagged, impatient, so unlike her mother's. I had tried to teach her patience, but she had shrugged me off with a laugh. "Who cares about handwriting, Dad? No one looks at paper anymore." Perhaps she was right. In one sense, no one her age cared. But here I was, years later, clinging to the strokes of ink that had outlasted her laughter, her warmth, her presence. Handwriting was more than words. It was proof that love had once lived here. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. My chest tightened with a mix of grief and determination. If my wife had trusted me with this secret, I could not let it fade into dust. Somewhere hidden in this house or in her belongings was the answer the key was meant to unlock. As I leaned back, the shadows of the room seemed to deepen. The silence wrapped around me, heavy, almost suffocating, until it felt like the walls themselves were waiting for me to move. I promised myself I would begin the search in the morning. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The following evening, I returned to the dining room, the same long table, still adorned with the fading lilies from my birthday. My daughter was already there, speaking in low tones to her cousin near the window. Their words floated just above a whisper, but the sharpness in her voice cut through the air like glass. "He has nothing left." She said, her tone clipped, dismissive. "He only pretends to hold on. Once he's gone, there will be nothing but debts." My chest tightened as I stood frozen in the doorway. I hadn't realized how deeply she believed that. To her, I wasn't a father anymore. I was a liability, a burden. My cousin shifted uneasily, glancing in my direction, but my daughter pressed on her words, dripping with certainty. "He's too old to know what's happening. He hides things, but I'll make sure it all comes out in the will." The sting of betrayal burned hot in my chest. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was conviction in her voice, spoken without hesitation. She wanted others to believe I was worthless. I stepped into the room quietly, and both their heads turned. My cousin looked away, immediately guilty, but my daughter held her chin high, her face unreadable. She didn't apologize, didn't flinch. Instead, she poured herself another glass of wine, her eyes sliding past me as though I were invisible. I sat at the table, the envelope heavy in my pocket, the brass key pressing into my side. I thought of the doctor once telling me about the human heart, how emotional pain could trigger physical reactions, tightening arteries, even leading to collapse. Stress can kill faster than age, he had said. I never understood the truth of it until now, hearing my daughter's voice dismiss me as nothing. To distract myself, I reached for the lilies. Their petals were beginning to curl, pale and brittle. In some folk traditions, lilies are a symbol of rebirth, but in others they are flowers of mourning laid upon graves. The irony did not escape me. My wife's favorite flower now stood at the center of my humiliation. The silence after her words pressed down heavy. My cousin cleared his throat, muttered an excuse, and slipped out of the room, leaving only the two of us. My daughter didn't speak, but the air between us was thick with unspoken hatred. "Silence has its own way of speaking," my wife used to tell me. Tonight, her absence echoed those words. My daughter's refusal to look at me, to acknowledge me, was a language sharper than any insult. I thought of the envelope again, of the key waiting to be used. She believed I had nothing. She believed the chair at my side would remain empty, but she did not know what her mother had left behind. I turned the key over in my pocket and whispered to myself, "Patience. The moment will come." But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. I thought I had grown immune to pain after losing my wife. But nothing pierced me quite like hearing my daughter's words echo in my mind. "He has nothing left." They rang louder than the grandfather clock downstairs, louder than the creaks of the old house at night. They dug into me with a sharpness no blade could match. The next morning I woke with a heaviness in my chest. My hand pressed instinctively against my ribs as though I could calm the throb inside. The doctor once told me that stress could manifest in the body, leaving scars no one could see. And as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the pale light filtering through the curtains, I realized he was right. Betrayal doesn't just wound the heart, it bruises the body too. I tried to distract myself with routine pouring tea, folding yesterday's newspaper, watering the plants in the corner of the room. Yet even the smallest things carried reminders. The tea set had been a gift from my wife. The newspaper's ink smudged onto my fingertips like stains I couldn't wash away. The plants drooped thirsty, as if mirroring my own exhaustion. At breakfast, my daughter walked past me, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. She didn't pause. didn't offer a greeting. Instead, she muttered something under her breath to her husband. His laugh followed her words, sharp and short like a slap across the face. I clenched my fist beneath the table. Anger mixed with sorrow burning hot, yet I said nothing. Words would only bounce back as ridicule. The sting of silence, I realized, could be far crueler than shouted insults. I remembered an old saying from my childhood village: a wound from a blade heals with time, but a wound from words lives in the blood. Today I felt the truth of that saying running through me, searing with every heartbeat. Later, when the house was quiet, I sat with the envelope again. My wife's handwriting seemed to glow against the paper, each curve a balm against the ache inside me. I ran my finger across the brass key, cool against my skin, and wondered if she had known I would need this comfort at my lowest point. Did she imagine her words would one day be my shield against our daughter's cruelty? As dusk fell, I looked into the mirror above my dresser. The man staring back at me seemed older, more fragile, his eyes clouded not just with age but with grief. Yet somewhere beneath the wrinkles there was still steel. Betrayal may have stung, but it had not broken me. Still, as I turned away from the mirror, I knew the sharp sting was only the beginning of something deeper, something darker. The true pain was yet to come. I thought I was safe, but I was wrong. The phone rang just after sunrise, its shrill tones slicing through the stillness of the house. I hesitated before answering, as if part of me already knew this call would not bring peace. When I finally picked it up, the calm, practiced voice of Mr. Allen, our family lawyer for nearly 30 years, greeted me. "Mr. Harris," he said, clearing his throat, "I believe it's time we meet." His words carried a gravity that made me sit straighter in my chair. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Lawyers rarely did, especially not when wills were involved. I glanced instinctively at the envelope resting on the table beside me, my wife's handwriting almost glowing in the morning light. Could it be connected? "There are documents your wife entrusted me with before her passing," he continued. "They need to be read in front of the family, soon." My fingers tightened around the receiver. "Why now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "There was a condition," he said simply. "Your wife was very specific. The time is now." The line buzzed with silence for a moment. I could hear the faint scratch of his pen on paper, the sound of him preparing notes. My wife had always been meticulous, planning details no one else thought of. She must have known this moment would come, the fracture in our family, the bitterness of betrayal. I agreed to meet him in 2 days. When I hung up, the weight of the conversation lingered in the room. The envelope, the brass key, and now the lawyer's sudden urgency, all threads weaving into a pattern I hadn't yet seen. I walked to the window and stared at the garden outside. The roses my wife planted years ago were blooming late, stubborn against the creeping chill of autumn. They reminded me of her resilience, her quiet strength. She had always believed beauty could survive even in the harshest conditions. Perhaps this was her final lesson to me: patience until the truth revealed itself. The day passed slowly, my daughter avoiding me as always. Her laughter drifted through the house as she entertained guests in the parlor. I stayed in my study, the phone call echoing in my ears. My heart thudded unevenly, each beat reminding me of the stakes. The lawyer's words weren't just about papers. They were about timing, destiny, and secrets only my wife had known. That night I placed the brass key beside the telephone. Its cold metal seemed to pulse with meaning. Somewhere hidden from my daughter's eyes was the lock it belonged to, and when the will was read, the truth would surface. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. 2 days later, I sat in Mr. Allen's office, the heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the scent of secrets kept too long. My daughter sat across from me, her arms crossed, her chin raised as if daring anyone to question her entitlement. Beside her husband scrolled idly on his phone, smugness etched into his posture. Mr. Allen adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. From a locked drawer he pulled out a thick brown folder, its corners frayed with age. He placed it carefully on the desk like a priest laying down a sacred text. "Your late wife," he began, his voice deliberate, left behind instructions that were unusual. My daughter's eyes gleamed. She leaned forward slightly as though ready to claim her prize. But the lawyer's next words drained the color from her face. "There is a condition tied to the inheritance. Nothing is to be distributed until the condition is met." A murmur rippled through the room. My daughter's knuckles tightened against the arm of her chair. "What kind of condition?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Mr. Allen opened the folder and read aloud. "To my beloved family, wealth without respect is poison. Therefore the inheritance shall not pass to those who dishonor the bonds of blood. Respect must be shown in deed, not in words. Until then, what is hidden remains hidden." The silence after his reading was suffocating. My daughter shifted uncomfortably, her defiance faltering. This is nonsense," she stammered. "What does that even mean?" The lawyer closed the folder gently, his gaze steady. "It means your mother expected harmony, or at the very least respect, before she allowed her estate to be claimed. Without it, everything remains sealed." I sat quietly, my wife's envelope heavy in my coat pocket. Her foresight was uncanny. She had known our daughter's pride, her hunger for control, her willingness to cut me down. And she had written a safeguard locking her wealth away until the true test revealed itself. The brass key in my pocket seemed to throb with new meaning. Could it be part of what she called hidden? A piece of the puzzle her will hinted at? My daughter's voice rose again, louder now, her composure cracking. "So we're supposed to wait forever, while he," she pointed at me with open contempt, "sits there pretending he's still in charge." Her husband tried to calm her, but the bitterness in her tone hung over the room. For once, I didn't feel anger. Instead, I felt the faintest curl of a smile forming at the edge of my lips. My wife had not left me defenseless. She had prepared this moment like a chess player laying a trap. The lawyer looked at me with a measured expression, as though he too suspected I held more than I was revealing. I met his gaze, then lowered my eyes to the brass key in my palm, hidden from sight. Silence has its own way of speaking, and in that silence my daughter's fear finally showed. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. That night after the meeting at Mr. Allen's office, I couldn't sleep. The words of my wife's will echoed endlessly in my mind. Respect must be shown in deed, not in words. They weren't just legal conditions. They were her voice, her warning, her last attempt to guide the family even after she was gone. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories came flooding back, a flashback to a quiet evening years earlier. My wife and I had been sitting on the porch, the cicadas buzzing in the summer air. She had leaned close, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "If one day our daughter forgets herself," she whispered, "promise me you won't let her cruelty destroy you. Promise me you'll hold on to the truth no matter what it costs." I had chuckled then, brushing her hair from her face. "She's stubborn, yes, but cruel, never." Her eyes had lingered on mine, serious, unflinching. "You don't see it yet, but I do. And when the time comes, you'll need to be stronger than both of us. Promise me." I remembered pausing, uncomfortable with her certainty. But I couldn't refuse her. "I promise," I said, taking her hand. It was a simple vow at the time, one I never thought I'd be called to keep. Yet here I was, years later, holding her envelope, her key, her words etched in the lawyer's voice. Back in the present, I rose from bed and walked to the old dresser we had shared. The top drawer still smelled faintly of her lavender sachets. I slid it open and found one of her journals bound in cracked leather. Her handwriting filled its pages in neat lines. Flipping through, I found passages underlined, notes about patience, about teaching through silence. And tucked between the pages was a pressed flower, brittle but intact. A lily. The sight of it brought tears I hadn't shed in years. She had left trails everywhere, in letters, in journals, in flowers preserved like secrets. She must have known I would need reminders of her strength. I thought of my daughter again, her refusal to sit beside me, her sharp words, her hunger for control. Perhaps my wife's promise wasn't just about enduring betrayal. Perhaps it was about revealing a truth so undeniable it could shatter pride and force reflection. I slipped the journal back into the drawer and clutched the brass key in my hand. Its weight pressed against my skin like the weight of the vow I had once made. In that quiet room with the past and present colliding, I whispered aloud to the empty air, "I promised you, and I will keep it." But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The days that followed felt colder, though the autumn sun still shone warmly on the house. My daughter moved around me like I was a piece of furniture, something to be avoided, ignored, stepped around, but never acknowledged. Her distance was no longer subtle. It had become a wall, brick by brick, built out of disdain and silence. At breakfast, she sat with her husband and whispered about future plans, as though I weren't even in the room. When I tried to ask her about the children, she responded with clipped words, eyes fixed on her coffee. The warmth I remembered from years ago, when she used to run to me with scraped knees and beg me to fix them, had vanished into the coldness of adulthood, poisoned by greed. One morning I found her in the study, rifling through drawers. She startled when I entered, but quickly masked it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just looking for an old photo," she said. But I knew better. She was searching for something more tangible, proof of money, property, secrets she believed I was hiding. The distance wasn't only between us. It spread through the house like smoke. My grandchildren seemed uncertain, unsure if they should hug me or keep their distance like their mother did. Once my grandson started to run toward me with a toy car in hand, but my daughter's sharp glance pulled him back. He froze mid-step, then retreated. That small moment pierced me deeper than any argument. I thought of a fact I once read in a psychology journal. Children often mirror their parents' attitudes toward elders. Respect or lack of it becomes a legacy. Watching my grandson hesitate broke something inside me. I feared that my daughter's coldness would not only rob me of her love, but also sever my bond with the next generation. Later, as I sat in the garden among the roses, I remembered a folk story my wife loved. It was about a farmer whose children grew greedy and distant, fighting over his land before he had even passed. The farmer, tired of their bickering, buried his treasure in the soil, leaving behind a single clue. When he died, the children dug everywhere, only to discover that the true treasure wasn't gold, but the fertile ground itself. The story had always seemed like a fable. Now it felt like prophecy. The gap between my daughter and me had grown so vast it felt impossible to cross. She believed I was hiding wealth. In truth, what I held the envelope, the key, my wife's words, was more powerful than gold. Yet I dared not reveal it too soon. Timing was everything. That evening, as I passed by the dining room, I overheard her mutter again, "He's clinging to control. But once he's gone, everything will finally be ours." Her husband chuckled. My heart clenched. The growing distance wasn't just emotional anymore. It was turning into something dangerous. I thought I was safe, but I was wrong. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and the house feels smaller. I had just come back from a slow walk in the garden when I heard voices in the study. My daughter's tone was sharp, almost accusatory, and when I stepped inside, her eyes locked onto me with a glare I had never seen before. "Stop hiding things," she snapped. "You think I don't notice? You keep papers, keys, envelopes. What are you trying to keep from me?" Her words struck like a whip. I froze, the brass key still heavy in my pocket. For a moment I considered lying, brushing it off, but something inside me refused. Her suspicion had grown like ivy, twisting around every silence between us, and now it had bloomed into full accusation. "I hide nothing from you," I said quietly, though my voice trembled. She stepped closer, her husband looming behind her. "Don't play the victim," she hissed. "You want to make me look like the ungrateful child while you pretend to be some noble martyr, but I know you. You've stashed things away, things that should be mine." The word "mine" echoed in my ears. Not ours, not the family's, just hers. That single word carried all the greed, all the bitterness, all the years of resentment she had let ferment in her heart. I remembered a medical fact I once read. Heightened anger can raise blood pressure so quickly that it risks stroke within minutes. Looking at her flushed face, the way her hands clenched into fists, I thought of that warning. My own pulse raced in response, each thud a reminder of my fragile mortality. I tried to breathe, to hold my calm. "Respect is more valuable than inheritance," I whispered, echoing the words my wife had once written. But my daughter only laughed bitterly. "Respect doesn't pay the bills. Respect doesn't buy this house." Her cruelty cut deeper than any financial demand. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick, unyielding, suffocating. My wife's absence pressed on me then, her lavender scent almost ghostly in the air, reminding me I wasn't as alone as I felt. My daughter turned on her heel, her husband following with a smirk. "You can cling to your secrets," she said over her shoulder. "But it won't last. I'll find them. And when I do, you'll have nothing left." The door slammed, rattling the shelves. I sank into the chair, clutching the envelope, the key pressing into my palm like a blade. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. That night, the confrontation weighed heavy on me. I sat alone in the study, the envelope on the desk, the brass key resting beside it. My daughter's words replayed over and over, sharp as knives. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air thick with the kind of silence that hums louder than any sound. I reached for a glass of water, but before I could lift it, a dizzy spell overtook me. The edges of the room blurred. My chest tightened as if an iron band had been fastened around it. I tried to call out, but my voice cracked into nothing. My knees buckled and I collapsed to the floor, my cheek pressing against the cold wood. For a moment, I thought this was how it would end, not with the truth revealed, not with justice served, but in silence alone on the study floor. I remembered reading once that the body under stress can betray you faster than age ever does. The article had warned high blood pressure, heart arrhythmias, fainting spells. They all strike without mercy when the soul is burdened. Now lying there, I felt the truth of that warning, written in every beat of my heart. Through the haze, I heard footsteps pounding. The study door burst open, and it was my grandson who rushed in. His small voice, usually filled with laughter, broke into panic. Grandpa, wake up!" His hands trembling, yet determined, reached for the phone on the desk. I felt the pressure of his tiny fingers against mine as he dialed for help. The next minutes passed in fragments. His frightened sobs, the rush of air as the paramedics arrived, the sting of ammonia beneath my nose. I tried to lift my head, but my body refused. I caught one final glimpse before the stretcher lifted me, my daughter standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, not with sorrow, but with something colder fear. Not for me, but for what my collapse might mean. The world tilted, the ceiling lights streaking as they wheeled me out. My grandson clung to my hand until a paramedic gently pulled him away. That brief touch, that desperate grip reminded me that love still lived in this house, even if it had grown faint under the weight of greed. As the ambulance doors closed, the siren wailed. My eyes drifted shut, but not before one thought seared itself into my mind. If I survived this, the truth could no longer wait. I thought I was safe, but I was wrong. The antiseptic scent of the hospital greeted me as I opened my eyes. White lights burned overhead, steady and merciless, and the rhythmic beeping of a monitor echoed my heartbeat. My chest felt sore, my body heavy as if every breath required permission. For a moment I thought I was alone. Then I turned my head and saw my grandson asleep in the chair beside me, his small hand still clutching the rail of my bed. It wasn't my daughter sitting there. She hadn't come. Instead, it was the boy, innocent, loyal, confused by the storm around him, who stayed through the night. His presence steadied me more than the oxygen flowing through the tubes. A nurse entered, quietly checking my vitals. She gave me a soft smile. "You're a lucky man," she said. "That collapse could have been far worse, but your grandson acted quickly. That likely saved you." Her words stung, but not from pain, from the sharp reminder of who truly cared. My daughter hadn't lifted a finger. Yet my grandson, barely tall enough to reach the phone, had become my lifeline. Later that day, a doctor visited. He was younger than me by decades, but carried himself with a calm authority. He explained that the episode was likely stress-induced, worsened by years of unchecked pressure on my heart. "You need to avoid conflict," he advised. "Emotional strain can be more dangerous than physical exertion at your age." I almost laughed at the irony. Avoid conflict. My entire life had become a battlefield of whispers, accusations, and silence. To avoid it would mean vanishing altogether. Yet his warning echoed louder than he intended. Perhaps my wife had known this too, that betrayal could kill a man as surely as disease. When the doctor left, I stared at the ceiling and thought of a peculiar detail I once read in a medical journal. Some patients, when recovering from heart episodes, reported dreaming of voices or scents tied to loved ones. That night, drifting in and out of sleep, I smelled lavender again, faint but undeniable. My wife's trace lingered as if she were standing right there, reminding me to endure. By the time visiting hours ended, only my grandson remained. My daughter never appeared. Not a call, not a word. The nurses glanced at me with quiet pity, but I turned away. I didn't need their sympathy. What I needed was strength, the kind my wife had left me in her letter. As the machines beeped softly through the night, I made myself a promise. If my wife had left me tools, the envelope, the brass key, the hidden truth, I would not waste them. The storm in my family could not be ignored any longer. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The following morning, I asked the nurse if my daughter had called. She hesitated before answering, her eyes flicking away. "No message," she finally said. I thanked her, though the weight of that silence pressed harder than any diagnosis. By afternoon, when visiting hours began, I expected at least a brief appearance, a forced smile, a dutiful check-in. But it wasn't her face I saw. It was my cousin, carrying a small basket of fruit. He shifted uncomfortably as he placed it on the table. She said she was busy," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. Busy. The word stabbed deeper than any knife. My daughter, whose cruelty had already hollowed my birthday, whose accusations had sent me spiraling into collapse, couldn't even spare an hour to stand by my bedside. It wasn't neglect. It was rejection, deliberate and final. My grandson begged to stay longer, but the nurse insisted children needed rest. He clung to my hand before leaving, whispering, "I'll come back tomorrow, Grandpa." His small voice was a balm, but the emptiness he left behind felt cavernous. That night, as the ward lights dimmed and the hospital fell into hushed tones, I lay staring at the ceiling tiles. The machines clicked softly beside me, measuring every beat of my fragile heart. And I thought of something I once read in a psychology book. When bonds between parent and child fracture, the pain can mirror physical bereavement. It isn't just emotional, the brain registers it as loss, as death. Lying there, I felt that truth coil inside me. In the quiet, my mind drifted back to an old memory. My wife had once told me a folk tale from her village of a father who fell ill and his children were summoned. Only the youngest came to care for him. The others stayed away chasing wealth and pleasure. When the father passed, his spirit blessed the faithful child and left the rest with nothing but regret. She had laughed then, saying it was a cautionary tale. I never thought it would become my life's reflection. The nurse offered me sleeping pills, but I declined. I needed clarity, not oblivion. I reached under the thin hospital blanket, feeling the outline of the brass key in my pocket. I had insisted on keeping it close even here. It was my anchor, my reminder that my wife's voice still lingered, that not all was lost. As the clock ticked past midnight, the ache of betrayal settled deeper. My daughter hadn't just denied me a visit. She had denied our bond, the years I had raised her, the countless sacrifices made in silence. And yet in that denial, I felt my resolve sharpen. If she would not come to me now, then the truth would have to come to her on my terms, in my time. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. 3 days after my collapse, the steady monotony of hospital life was broken by a knock at my door. When I looked up, it wasn't a nurse or doctor. It was Mr. Allen, the family lawyer, holding a weathered leather briefcase. His gray suit was slightly wrinkled, his expression unreadable, but the moment our eyes met, I knew he hadn't come for a casual visit. "Mr. Harris," he said softly, stepping into the room, "I heard about your condition. I thought it best we speak sooner rather than later." He placed the briefcase gently on the chair beside my bed, then leaned closer so only I could hear. "Your wife left me with something more than her will. Something I was instructed to deliver only if circumstances deteriorated." My breath caught. "And you believe they have?" He gave a small nod. "Your daughter's behavior, the fracture in the family, it is precisely what your wife feared. She foresaw that respect might fade, and she prepared safeguards." He opened the briefcase and removed a small locked box made of dark wood. Its brass lock gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights. My pulse quickened as my hand instinctively brushed the key in my pocket. Could this be it? The lock waiting all these years? Mr. Allen didn't notice my gesture. He placed the box on the bedside table, his voice low. "She instructed that this remains sealed until the will reading. But she also said you may open it sooner if betrayal became too great a burden to bear." The weight of his words pressed on me. My wife had trusted him, yes, but she had trusted me more. She must have known I would know when the time had come. I rested my hand over the box. The wood was smooth, polished by years of safekeeping. It looked ordinary, yet I felt the gravity of what it contained. Ordinary objects often hold extraordinary truths. A silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Mr. Allen straightened his tie and said, "The formal reading is scheduled next week. I urge you to prepare yourself. What is inside here? It will change everything." He left the box with me and departed as quietly as he came. Alone again, I turned the box in my hands. My wife's foresight echoed in every curve of the lock. The brass key in my pocket seemed to throb with recognition, as if urging me to try it. But not yet. Timing was everything. Still, as I stared at the locked box, I knew the storm was nearing its peak. I thought I was safe, but I was wrong. The day of the will reading arrived with a chill in the air, though it wasn't winter yet. The house seemed unusually still that morning, as though it knew what was about to unfold. Mr. Allen had insisted everyone be present, so the dining room, the very place where my daughter once left the seat beside me empty, was filled again with family. The atmosphere was tense. My daughter sat near the head of the table, her husband at her side, both wearing expressions of entitlement wrapped in polite smiles. My cousins lingered by the windows, whispering nervously, while my grandchildren fidgeted with restless energy. The wooden box Mr. Allen had brought sat at the center of the table, its brass lock gleaming like a secret waiting to be revealed. When Mr. Allen arrived, briefcase in hand, the room fell silent. He placed the legal folder beside the box and began arranging his papers with deliberate slowness. My daughter tapped her fingers impatiently, her eyes darting toward me as though daring me to oppose her. "Thank you all for gathering," the lawyer began, his voice steady. "Your mother's will is not only a distribution of assets, it is a test of respect, as she clearly outlined. What happens today will determine much of what comes next." The tension thickened. I noticed my grandson watching intently, his small hand gripping the edge of his chair. My daughter, however, leaned back with a smirk. She whispered to her husband too low for others to hear, but her confidence was written plainly across her face. As the lawyer unfolded the documents, he asked everyone to remain seated until the reading was complete. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted, but no one dared to leave. The box remained untouched, its presence almost louder than his words. In that moment, I realized the irony. For years, my wife and I had gathered family around this very table to celebrate birthdays, Christmases, even ordinary Sunday dinners. Now it had become a courtroom of sorts, a stage where respect, greed, and betrayal would all be laid bare. The silence felt alive, pulsing. I reached into my pocket, feeling the familiar edges of the brass key. My wife's handwriting, her warning, her foresight, all of it had led to this moment. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. Mr. Allen cleared his throat, ready to proceed when the tension finally broke. My daughter rose from her chair, her movements sharp, deliberate. She looked across the table at me, then at the empty seat beside mine, and with a sneer she walked toward it. For a fleeting second, I thought she might return to her rightful place, that perhaps some memory of family would win out. But at the last moment, she turned away and sat deliberately on the opposite end of the table. Gasps rippled through the room. My cousins exchanged uneasy glances. My grandson stared at her in confusion, and Mr. Allen paused mid-sentence. The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. My daughter leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on me with defiance. "I will not sit beside him," she declared, her voice cool and cutting. "He's lied, hidden things, and humiliated this family long enough. Don't pretend respect where none exists." Her words landed like stones. The very condition my wife had written into her will, respect shown in deed, not in words, was being broken in plain sight. She wasn't merely refusing a seat, she was refusing me. Mr. Allen adjusted his glasses, his face grave. "Your mother anticipated that respect might fade. What you do today carries weight in how her wishes are honored." But my daughter only folded her arms and smirked. "Then let it carry. I won't pretend." Her husband gave a low chuckle, and the sound burned in my ears. The rest of the family shifted uneasily, no one daring to intervene. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, but inside my chest my heart thundered. I thought of something I once read in ancient courts. Silence was sometimes considered admission of guilt. Here in my own house, my silence could be mistaken for weakness. Yet my wife had taught me differently. Silence could also be power if wielded with patience. The brass key pressed against my leg, its weight grounding me. I remembered her words in the letter, "When cruelty outweighs love, let the truth speak for itself." My daughter's refusal was more than cruel, it was proof. I met her eyes and instead of speaking gave the faintest nod. She flinched as though my calm unsettled her more than any outburst could have. The will remained unopened on the table, but the battle lines had already been drawn. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. Mr. Allen unfolded the will with deliberate care, the crisp sound of paper filling the charged silence. All eyes fixed on him, but I noticed how my daughter leaned forward, eager, her lips pressed thin as though she were already preparing to claim what she believed was hers. He cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Harris," he began. The mention of my wife's name sent a shiver through me. For a moment I could almost hear her voice in the room, steady and calm, reminding us all of what mattered. The first page was simple enough: legal declarations, signatures, the dry formalities of law. But then Mr. Allen's voice grew heavier as he read aloud. "Before any division of assets, I declare that respect among my family is paramount. Without it, no inheritance shall pass. Respect must be proven, not spoken." The words echoed through the dining room like a judgment. My daughter shifted uncomfortably, though she tried to mask it with a scoff. Her husband muttered under his breath, but Mr. Allen pressed on, ignoring the tension. The page went on to list properties: the family home, the small cabin by the lake, a set of accounts whose balances were not specified but hinted at stability, perhaps even wealth. Gasps broke out as cousins exchanged glances. My daughter's eyes glittered with hunger, but her smirk faltered when she realized nothing was yet hers. I sat silently, my wife's letter burning in my pocket, her brass key pressing against my thigh like a reminder. This was only the surface, the beginning of the reveal. The real truth, I suspected, was buried deeper in the pages. As Mr. Allen paused to take a sip of water, I thought of an old cultural detail my wife once told me. In her grandmother's village, wills were sometimes read aloud 3 times to ensure the spirits themselves bore witness. The first reading was for the family, the second for the ancestors, and the third for the soul of the deceased. Listening to the lawyer's solemn voice, I felt as though all 3 audiences were present with us now. I looked at my daughter, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. But she quickly masked it with defiance, leaning back and crossing her arms. The first page had unsettled her, but it was only the beginning. Silence has its own way of speaking. And in that silence, I felt my wife's presence more than ever. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. Mr. Allen turned to the second page, his voice lower now, as though the weight of the words pressed even on him. The family leaned in a collective breath held. My daughter's smirk returned fragile, but present, her fingers drumming impatiently on the polished wood of the table. She expected this page to crown her queen of the estate. Instead, the lawyer read aloud, "To my husband and children within this estate lies an inheritance not visible to every eye. It is bound by a clause. Whoever mocks, humiliates, or abandons their family in public or private shall forfeit their share. That portion shall instead pass to the one who kept respect even in silence." The words fell like thunder. My daughter's hand froze mid-tap. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, whispering something to her, but her eyes darted toward me wide for the first time. Gasps echoed from my cousins. One aunt clutched her chest and whispered she knew. I sat motionless, though my heart pounded against my ribs. My wife had crafted this clause with precision, almost as if she had predicted every cruelty, every refusal, every word my daughter had spoken in recent months. Respect proven in deed, silence as shield, loyalty as currency. My grandson tugged at his mother's sleeve, his innocent eyes searching her face. "Mom, does that mean—" She yanked her arm away, her voice sharp. "Quiet." The reaction spoke volumes, louder than any confession. The lawyer continued, "The proof of this clause rests within a separate item, sealed and secured. Until it is opened, the inheritance remains incomplete." His hand gestured toward the locked wooden box at the center of the table. The brass lock gleamed under the light, almost pulsing with significance. I felt the key in my pocket like a living thing. It warmed against my palm, as if urging me to rise, to end the charade, to reveal what my wife had hidden. But still I waited. Timing she had written was everything. An old saying from my childhood slipped into my mind. "The axe forgets, but the tree remembers." My daughter thought her refusals, her humiliations, her betrayal would fade. But the tree, her mother's will, remembered. And now the axe was about to swing the other way. The silence stretched thicker than any argument. My daughter's face grew pale, her confidence cracking at the edges. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The moment Mr. Allen finished reading the clause, the dining room exploded into chaos. Voices rose like a storm, overlapping sharp with panic and greed. My cousins leaned toward one another, whispering furiously, while my daughter's husband slammed his palm on the table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "How can words on paper decide what's fair? He's manipulated this." He pointed at me. His face flushed red. My daughter stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You think you can shame me with this?" she spat. Mother's words were twisted. She never meant for this to humiliate me. But her trembling voice betrayed her. For the first time in years, I saw fear behind her defiance. Mr. Allen held up his hands, his calm demeanor straining under the pressure. "These are her exact instructions. Nothing here was changed. And until the sealed box is opened, nothing is final." The wooden box glowed under the light as though it held fire inside. My hand brushed against the brass key in my pocket, its edges sharp against my palm. I could end this noise with a single turn, but I waited, remembering my wife's words, "Respect must be proven." Around the table, accusations flew. One cousin muttered that I had hidden money for years. Another insisted my daughter deserved nothing after her behavior. My grandson, caught in the storm, looked from face to face with wide, frightened eyes. "Why is everyone fighting?" he whispered, but his voice was drowned out. I thought of a fact I once read: noise has weight. In psychological studies, rooms filled with constant shouting raise cortisol levels, as though the body itself is being battered. Tonight, I felt that truth in my bones. Every yell pressed heavier on my chest, threatening to undo me. To steady myself, I glanced at the lilies on the table. Their petals had begun to wilt, curling inward like clenched fists. In folk belief, lilies can symbolize both mourning and renewal. Looking at them now, I wondered which path awaited us: destruction or rebirth. My daughter's voice cut through again, shrill, desperate. "This is mine. I gave up years for this family, and I will not walk away empty-handed." Her husband nodded fiercely, gripping her arm. "If this house doesn't pass to us, I'll fight it in court. You'll see." Mr. Allen sighed, tapping the box. "All answers lie here, but until the lock is opened, speculation only deepens the wounds." The room fell into uneasy murmurs, the fire of the eruption fading into smoldering tension. My eyes dropped to the key once more. The time was coming, but I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The room quieted as Mr. Allen placed his hand firmly on the wooden box. "We can't continue without addressing this," he said, his tone carrying finality. All eyes turned toward the lock gleaming like a sentinel in the middle of the table. My breath slowed as I slipped the brass key from my pocket. Gasps rose when the family noticed. My daughter's eyes widened, her confident posture faltering. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice higher than before. I held it gently between my fingers, the metal catching the light. "From your mother," I said simply. The words were enough. Silence fell like a hammer. Her face drained of color, the smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of panic. She had built her strength on the belief that I was powerless, that I had nothing but silence. The sight of that key shattered her illusion. She clutched at her husband's arm, whispering frantically, her voice cracking. Mr. Allen nodded toward me. "That key belongs to the box. She entrusted it to you." I inclined my head. She knew this day would come. Murmurs spread among the relatives, some leaning forward eagerly, others recoiling as though the truth might wound them. My grandson's eyes glowed with curiosity, but my daughter could only stare at the key, her lips trembling. For the first time in years, she looked smaller, diminished. I thought of an obscure fact I once read about ancient ceremonies. In some traditions, when a sealed container was finally opened, those who had wronged the family were expected to bow in shame. Watching my daughter, now pale and unsteady, I felt as though history itself demanded her humility. Slowly, I slid the key into the lock. The click echoed louder than any of the shouting before, a single sound that silenced the entire room. My daughter's knuckles turned white as she gripped the table, her composure collapsing with each second. Her face turned pale, and in that moment I saw the truth. Her fear was not of losing wealth, but of being exposed. I thought I was safe, but I was wrong. The lock released with a soft snap and the wooden box creaked open. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, and beneath them a single photograph of my wife holding our daughter as a child. Her handwriting was scrawled across the back, "Respect is love made visible." Mr. Allen carefully lifted the documents, scanning them before speaking. "These are legal transfers," he announced. "They designate property accounts and assets. But the key detail is this: every portion is conditional. Those who mocked or humiliated are excluded. The inheritance passes instead to the one who upheld respect in silence, if not in words." The room froze. My daughter's breath hitched audibly. She pushed back her chair, shaking her head. "No, this isn't real. Mother wouldn't do this to me." But her pale face betrayed her. The proof was before everyone, her own actions condemning her more clearly than any witness could. The cousins murmured, some nodding, as if the truth had always been inevitable. My grandson looked at me, his eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in years' pride. My daughter lunged forward, snatching at the papers, but Mr. Allen's hand was quicker. "These are official," he said firmly. "Your mother anticipated denial, which is why duplicates exist in the court's registry. Nothing here can be undone." Her husband muttered angrily, his voice low and venomous, but even he could not disguise the collapse in their plans. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. My daughter slumped into her chair, her earlier defiance gone, replaced by a trembling bitterness. I sat still, my wife's letter heavy in my pocket. I thought of something I once read in a psychology journal. Shame burns hotter than anger because it forces the soul to face itself. Watching my daughter now, I understood the truth of that. She wasn't just angry at me. She was scorched by the mirror my wife had placed before her. The photograph still lay in the box, half-shadowed, the ink of her handwriting, fading but clear. I lifted it gently, my thumb brushing against the word love. For the first time since her death, I felt her victory in the room, not mine, not wealth's, but hers. The family sat stunned, each face reflecting a different reckoning. Some looked relieved, others jealous, but all of them understood one thing: the truth had been spoken and there was no going back. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The house emptied slowly after the reading relatives, leaving an uneasy silence. Some avoided my eyes, others patted my shoulder awkwardly, unsure what words could mend the wound that had split the family open. My daughter was the first to storm out, her husband dragging her by the arm. She didn't look back, not once. Her footsteps echoed through the hall until the front door slammed, shaking the frame. I remained at the table long after everyone had gone, staring at the chair beside me, the same empty seat that had haunted my birthday. It stood as a monument to what was lost not just today, but across years of distance. I had always hoped she would return to it, that love would guide her back. Now I knew it might remain vacant forever. The papers Mr. Allen left behind sat stacked neatly in front of me, untouched. They represented wealth, yes, but they also represented the price of betrayal. I thought of a line from a book I once read: "Money reveals character, not the other way around." Today, those words had proven themselves true. In the stillness, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wife's letter once more. The lavender scent had faded, but her presence clung to the paper. I read her handwriting again, tracing each curve like a prayer. She had known this day would come. She had prepared me not with riches, but with resolve. My gaze fell to the photograph from the box, her smile radiant, holding our daughter as a little girl. The innocence in that image pierced me. How had we gone from that warmth to this cold estrangement? I let the silence answer, though it had no comfort to give. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of fallen leaves scraping across the ground. It reminded me of an old folk belief: when leaves fall in clusters, they carry messages from ancestors. Tonight, it felt as though my wife herself whispered through them, urging me toward peace rather than bitterness. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Betrayal cuts, but forgiveness, even unspoken, can soothe the wound. Whether my daughter ever sought it or not, I would choose to let the anger pass. I could not let her cruelty define the last years of my life. The empty chair still hurt to see, but it no longer felt like a defeat. It was a reminder of what was lost, and of what I still had: the love of a grandson, the foresight of a wife, the quiet dignity that silence had preserved. But I soon realized that wasn't the worst of it. The morning after the will reading, I sat in the garden where the roses still bloomed despite the creeping chill. Their petals, soft and bruised by the season, reminded me of my own heart, battered but not broken. The sun stretched across the lawn, pale and forgiving, as if inviting me to lay down the weight I had carried for too long. My daughter's absence echoed in the silence of the house. She had not returned, nor did I expect her to. For years I had clung to the hope that she would soften, that one kind gesture would restore what was lost. But I understood now: love cannot be demanded, only offered, and sometimes it must be offered with the strength to let go. The documents rested in Mr. Allen's hands. The estate would follow my wife's wishes. My daughter's cruelty had carved her out of her mother's legacy, and no courtroom or argument could erase the truth written in her own actions. Justice had come not through revenge, but through the quiet foresight of the woman I had loved. I thought of an old saying from her village: "The river carves stone not with force but with patience." My wife had been that river. Even after her death, her patience had shaped the outcome of our lives, smoothing the jagged edges of betrayal into something resembling peace. As I breathed in the cool air, I let my fingers trace the photograph of her holding our daughter as a child. For a moment, sorrow welled up, the memory of what could have been, what should have been. But alongside sorrow came gratitude. Gratitude for her wisdom, for my grandson's small hand clutching mine in the hospital, for the chance to rise again after collapse. I realized then that forgiveness was not for my daughter's sake, but for mine. To carry bitterness would be to let her win twice, once in cruelty and again in memory. I would not grant her that power. So I whispered into the morning breeze, as though my wife still sat beside me: "I forgive her. I forgive, and I let go." The garden felt lighter. The roses seemed brighter. My heart, though scarred, beat steady. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, please subscribe and continue with the next story in the playlist.